OneShot API is now available on If This Then That, the workflow automation platform. I'm going to walk you through the three components that you can use to build applets on IFTTT. First thing you're going to do after you log into IFTTT.com, we're going to choose to create a new applet. This will bring you to the creator page. First thing we need to do is add a trigger. OneShot API offers a trigger service. Two different kinds of triggers are currently offered by OneShot API. One is called successful transactions. The other one is called failed transactions. So what this means is that this trigger will fire when IFTTT detects that a transaction has successfully been mined from your OneShot account. This one will fire if IFTTT detects that a transaction has failed from your OneShot API account. So the first time you try to add OneShot API to an applet in IFTTT, it's going to ask you to connect to the OneShot API service, which means it's going to authenticate against your user account. So if you click the connect button, an auth window will pop up. Just hit accept, and now you are connected to your OneShot API account. So for instance, for the successful transactions, we can choose the business that we want to check for transactions against. We can check for which specific chains we want to monitor. We can also just monitor all of them at once. We can also choose to specifically monitor specific wallets that we've provisioned in our OneShot account. And lastly, we can also choose to monitor transactions from specific endpoints that we've imported into our OneShot account. You can also leave these set to all, and it'll monitor for any successful transactions from your OneShot account in IFTTT. The next service that we have available from OneShot is a query. So a query for OneShot allows you to read information from the blockchain or look at your transaction history. For instance, let's look at the read. Here, again, we can choose to use one of our read endpoints that we've imported into our smart contracts portfolio in OneShot API. And if the read endpoint requires input parameters, you can put those here. So for instance, allowance, you would put in something like owner, and then an address, and then spender, and then another address. And depending on the trigger that you use for your applet, potentially fill these in with ingredients that come from the trigger. You can also stack queries. So for instance, we could do a read and list transactions. List transactions is super useful if you want to prevent sending, for instance, the same user account tokens more than once. So here, again, we can choose which one of our businesses in OneShot we want to look at. We can say, do we want to look for transactions from a certain write endpoint? We can say we only want to look for transactions that are in a specific state, for instance, completed or failed. And you can even filter on the memo field. So in OneShot API, when you submit transactions, you can append to it a human-readable memo, which is super useful for lots of things. For instance, like I mentioned earlier, who did I send these tokens to? You can put a username in there. You can also filter on the timestamp that the transaction was created at, so you can limit to transactions created after a certain time point or transactions created before a certain time point. Lastly, OneShot API has an action. We only have one action available, which is the execute a contract method. This will actually trigger an on-chain transaction. The first thing you'll do is choose the right endpoint that you want to make a transaction against. So for instance, I have a test token mint endpoint that I've already imported into my OneShot account. I would put the parameters here. This one in particular takes a 2, which is an address, and an amount, which is just a number, for instance, 1,000. Here's the memo field that we talked about in the list transactions query. Here you can put anything that you want to put in it. Typically it's useful to add an ingredient from your trigger to know why that transaction was triggered. So that's the quick run through of the 3 components that we have available for use in IFTTT with One-Shot API. Check out our other videos for full working applets for Discord, Telegram, and X.